Elmer, I guess we met at a Veterans of the Battle of the Bulge meeting.
That's correct.
And
You were one of the first guys I met. He was in the organization before I was, but when I came in, you were the first guy I met at that meeting.
yeah,
And we've been good friends ever since.
we've Milt Shepard founded the organization about 1999, and we first attracted about 40 members by the second or third meeting. And he had a good buddy by the name of Rudy Callender who did all the pick and shovel work for him. But Milt was the spokesperson, and Rudy did all of the publicity and put the organization together. They said they bet they could find a bunch of veterans who fought in the Battle of the Bulge down here in Cape May County, and they did. They put together about, and I joined about their fifth meeting, and I guess you joined shortly thereafter.
Shortly thereafter, that's
Yeah,
correct.
yeah.
So you didn't know each other, obviously, back in the day, serving.
One of the best things that ever happened to me joining the South Jersey chapter of the Veterans of the Battle of the Bulge was having meeting Gus and his wife. Otherwise, I never would have met them.
It was a little strange at first joining that organization because this is the first time a lot of the guys had ever spoken about the war. And they were even shy about speaking about the war. We're talking about World War II, of course. They were even shy about speaking with one another. And it must have taken 2 or 3 years before the fellows began to be comfortable enough to do that. And Elmer and I were among the few who would mix in and try to get some of these guys to talk. And then it just worked out very, very nicely. Unfortunately, we've lost about 30 guys now since we started the chapter in '99.
Well, it's unique. You know, I don't belong to the American Legion. I belong to the Veterans of the Foreign Wars. But this is different. It's a smaller organization. We have common things to talk about. When I introduced myself to one of the members when I first got there, I told him he was in the 8th Armored Division. He said, "Yeah, I was in the 94th Infantry Division. You relieved us at Netting, which is a small town in Germany." And that, I never forgot that. Here's a guy after all these years that I met, and we helped to save that guy's life because they were taking a terrific beating. And then it was our turn.
Yeah, like that.
Well, I know we're jumping around a little bit,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
tell me the battle, the experience for you. What are some of the things that really have stuck with you all these years?
Well, the thing that stuck with me, we were the Bulge had already started before we got there. We were crossing France in a half track, but with our first place of action was in this small town in Germany, as I just mentioned, and they had taken this small town 3 times, and each time they were pushed back. And as we were walking up one side of the street, these other guys were walking back. It looked as if all hell had broken loose. They were in such bad shape. And it turned out that we were able to hold that town, but I think only because the 94th Infantry Division had softened them up after 3 times. And it was just, but I'll never forget walking up there and seeing my first dead German lying in the snow, and then my first dead GI lying in the snow. It was a sort of a breathtaking incident. It didn't make us feel very good. It made us realize, okay, we're here, and this is it.
How about you?
Well, leading up to the Battle of the Bulge, they didn't send us into combat until you were 19 years old. And I celebrated my 19th birthday crossing the Atlantic on the Queen Elizabeth. And shortly thereafter, we ended up in France. I was transported across France in 40 and 8. That's boxcars. And we saw our first action in the Saar Basin in Germany. Allies had already reached the German border. we saw our first action in the Soar Basin, and this was shortly after Thanksgiving, on a 44. We were in battle there, and we'd relieved a division also on the line, and we began to take quite a pounding there, and that too is where I saw my first casualties, dead GIs. That's also the first place that I ever saw people suddenly go into shell shock. One of our guys, perfectly regular guy all the way through, heard his first cannon shot and froze up, and it was absolutely worthless. They tried to put him in the kitchen, they tried to make a messenger, but nothing happened. We just had to take him out. That was also the first time that I had gone out in the battlefield, an open field, a day before. A couple of German tanks had taken out one of our infantry regiments as they were advancing. So my first assignment was at night, was to go out with a medic and a stretcher, and as we left the woods, we'd go out and the flares would go up, the whole place was illuminated, we would freeze right where we were. We went and picked up one of the GIs. There were a lot of guys that were moaning, calling for their mothers, and couldn't forget that. And the first time I realized what dead weight meant was when we picked up a wounded GI and put him on the stretcher, and the medic and I had to stagger back with this weight of this normal guy may weigh 150, 160 pounds, but just didn't realize how heavy it was. We went back, stopping each time a flare went up, and no more fire occurred. Right after that, we were put into trucks because we heard there was a big battle going on up north. And we thought, if that's a big battle, what the heck are we in? Overnight, we went through mud to getting out of the SAR, and it turned colder. The roads began to freeze up. It became very icy, and we spent 2 nights in trucks and jeeps working our way up through Reims on Christmas Day. And I can tell you that no one attended service that day at the cathedral because it was a convoy after convoy of tanks and trucks and half-tracks just going around that cathedral, coming from all directions and heading toward the outbreak that happened in Belgium. Got off the trucks finally when we were assigned to into Belgium, and that too I was a mortarman. We got out of the jeeps, we carried our mortars. I had a base plate which I carried. The mortar came in 3 parts, and each part weighed about 50 pounds. I carried a base plate, and I remember lugging that thing, and it began to snow. And by the time the morning arrived, we were into snow between our knees and our hips. And next night, we did bivouac in that same snow, in the same area, and before we started any patrols. And that was my very first recollection of being in Germany. Guys used to relate the story that the only way, we were on guard duty 1 hour on, 1 hour off during the night. So you'd wake your buddy, it's his turn to be alert, and then you'd get your 1 hour sleep. So that was my introduction to combat, and that was before we started our patrols and discovered what was going on around us.
Heck of an introduction.
Yeah,
yes, it was cold.
the first introduction to combat is difficult. We taken a small town, and within 5 minutes, our company commander was killed, and I can still hear the company master sergeant yelling, "Well, here we are, Lieutenant Fisher, you are now company commander." And it was an interesting story, and he was a big, maybe I shouldn't say this, he was a big gay master sergeant. And if you want to talk about whether they should be in the service or not, he held that group together after the company commander was killed. And if it hadn't been for him, we might not have been successful. So he saved the day for us. I'll never forget it.
But you mentioned that some people have really never talked about the battle until recently for some of these get-togethers. What do you think it is that keeps some people from being able to talk about their experiences?
I have a theory that anytime we would, after the war, I would start to speak with anybody that didn't quite understand what we were talking about, because we were by then speaking a different language. We were speaking in lingo. And civilians didn't really understand what we were saying. And you talk to another GI, and he always had a better story than yours. He was shot at more times, or he was in worse conditions, and so you just stopped talking about it. It was hopeless. And my girlfriend was not interested at all. And people at work, we'd returned to work by then, were all veterans. They all had their own experiences. So it was just, we didn't speak about it, we just tried to get it back to normal.
Well, it's interesting. Gus sort of got this started that we, at times, would go around and talk to different schools here in the county. And without exception, the teachers said that the kids got so much more out of hearing it from us than about reading it in a book. And Gus did a lot of that, and so did I, but not as much as he did. And it's I enjoyed it. I'm sure Gus did too. And the kids would ask fantastic questions. We didn't go in there and tell them about guys having their heads blown off and so forth. We didn't completely mask it over, but we didn't make it as bloody as it was. There was no need to do that, and they still got a lot out of it.
Yeah, we'd try to tell them about the lighter side of things. I'd like to tell them a story about being holed up in being a mortar group. By the way, Elmer was a rifleman, and those guys had the worst conditions of anyone.
But not much worse than the mortar, because if they zeroed in on you guys,
well,
that was
the
it.
riflemen, as General Patton said, were 93% of his casualties were riflemen. So I was a mortar man. I was lucky. I was about 500 to 1,000 yards from back of the line most of the time, except when I was a frontline observer, which happened once. But most of the time, we'd tell stories. One of my favorites is we had a kid from the Cajun country down in Louisiana. I didn't even know what Cajuns were at the time. And of course, he Curly kept to himself. He didn't even speak English when he came in. He was taught to read and write by the Army. And he spent all of his time sitting on his footlocker through training, writing letters home, and writing letters, and reading letters, and he got a tremendous amount of correspondence. And Curly was still sort of a bit of a loner. We got over to one of these villages which we'd captured in Belgium, and Curly disappeared. It didn't matter because it was a static position, and we were all in basements, holed up. We at least didn't have to go outside, and it was worth your life to go outside anyway. You never knew when artillery would come in. So we spent about a week or two there. Finally, we went out on patrol, found that there was no Germans in the area, and that we were going to pack up and leave. So the GIs came out of this smoky basements. We were filthy, unshaven, and bleary-eyed, and we were getting ready to hop onto the jeeps again and get the crews together. And somebody said, "Where's Curly?" And here comes Curly walking down the road, his rifle slung over his arm, not a care in the world. And Curly comes out and said, "Where the heck have you been, Curly?" He said, "Oh," he said, "I was with a farmer's daughter, a farmer and his friends and his daughters." And so he said, "Oh, it was nice." He said, they had eggs every day, and he said we had bacon. It was very nice, and I slept with a with a down quilt, and here we are in the grime and the grit, and here comes Curly, truly fresh as a daisy walking. And as the jeeps and trucks are pulling out of town, all the villagers were there and they said, "Au revoir, Curly," and the mothers and fathers were pointing to the kids, saying, "Curly, Curly," and so we left town. So we all had a new respect for Curly.
Well, you know,
By the way, that was his name.
Curly.
Curly Richard was the Army named him Curly Richards. were assigned to a rifle company, and that day we met the troops. On our way up to the front, about 4 o'clock in the morning, we got very close to the Siegfried Line, which is a series of fortresses which ran from the Alps to the North Sea, defending the German border. We were to penetrate that line that day. We went in, immediately ran into heavy artillery fire. One of our sergeants was killed in the same. I'd taken shelter in it looked like a bomb crater. And the snow was beginning to melt slightly then, and there was a big pile of slush in the bottom. I remember being on the side and trying my best not to slide into the slush down at the bottom of the crater, and yet the the artillery shells were landing all around us. Well, that was the first time that I'd ever had a shell land in such close proximity. I have no idea how close it was, but it had Sam Osborne's number, but didn't have mine. The experience was just incredible. I remember before I took cover in the hole, walking along, and that shell landed near us, and it was just like a boom, and the blood just runs right out of your head down to your feet, and you hit the ground. And I began to bargain with God. I said, I'll give you an arm. I'll give you a leg. How about an arm and a leg? Just get me out of here. And then it came to our senses, and we dove into the pit then. But that was the type of experience you had. That was only the start of that day. The day continued on into the night. During that day, our major, who was our battalion commander, won the Distinguished Service Cross because he went through a minefield, found out where the fire was coming that had pinned us down, and he directed his anti-tank guns to that spot, found out where it was, directed fire, and stopped that artillery fire. And that was the first part of that day. The rest went on. It just went on and on as we advanced. It was machine gun fire coming out of the. We made a mistake of walking in front of one of the fortresses. One of the what the hell do you call them? Fortress, yeah.
Yeah, I know.
And it was pinned down. Thought I could help the rifleman out a little bit. I had a little carbine I was carrying. And I poked my head up, and I went to look around. And I heard something in back of me. I looked over the back of my head. The tree in back of me was splintering. So that was the machine gun fire going over me. And so I didn't help the rifleman anymore. I dug further in. We had a captain with that organization that day. His name was Captain Wall, and he came to us. He jumped into a pole alongside of us and said, fire a round of smoke. See if you can find out where you zero in. We fired the round of incendiary and didn't see anything, so he gave up on us. And he went on to direct his rifleman, and he's directing his messenger to go here, and he's directing his machine gunners to place it there. And Captain Wall was a dynamo. He's a West Pointer. He was killed 3 days later. After that engagement was over, he was picked off by a sniper. He also won the Distinguished Service Cross that day. And I was so proud to have served with those two guys. And I think our regiment won 3 Distinguished Service Crosses in the war, and 2 of them were men I was with that day. I won't go on with the rest of the story. There was mortar fire. Eventually, we won. We find out, and I went back with one of my other sergeants who wanted to pick up Sam Osborne's wallet and send it to his wife, and so I went with him that day. But everything is quieted down. Nothing. everybody had left. The Germans had left. We had left. There was nothing but a few bodies lying around, and Sam was one of ours, and that was the worst day I'd ever spent.
I guess my worst day was having my squad leader and best friend killed right alongside of me, something similar to what you did. We were pinned down and couldn't get up, and just machine gun fired. And my buddy made a wrong move, and bingo, just like that, he was dead. And I held him in my arms, and I made a promise that someday, Gus, Chuck, I'll come back here and visit this place. He didn't hear me, of course, he was dead. And it wasn't until 1990 I finally did get to go back to that spot. It's something I always wanted to do. I was just delighted that I was able to do it. Another kind of story, not related to battle, but our group was in England waiting to cross the channel. And I got 2 letters I had sent to my brother returned to me, and they said deceased. He was already in Germany and was killed. That's how I found out my brother was killed. I never got over that either. But those are things that happen, and it happened to many, many other ones, just not me or Gus. But there's so many stories like that. You can't think of all of them, but they're just, that's why there is no good war.
No.
I've never served, but I can only imagine that going through something like this, it has to change you in lots of ways. I mean, hopefully some ways that are good, but it has to be ultimately very profound to have to go to see somebody right next to you die and realize, gee, just one wrong move and it
Could have been us, could have been Chuck,
Could have been
Gus.
anybody. Yep. Could have been anybody. It's you never knew when, and we were so young. I guess we grew up pretty quick.
Yeah, that's right. We were, well, you were 19, I was 19, in those battles, and you do grow up pretty quick. And,
Yeah.
How do you think going through that changes your outlook on life? I mean, clearly you come back from that very different than the person you were when you went over. It's going to affect the way you see things. Any idea how you feel it kind of changed, or did it change your outlook on life?
Well, it made me feel very, very thankful that I had survived, but I keep telling myself, I'm not special. Millions of other GIs were in the same situation, and it affected them differently. I met guys in college who just couldn't cope, and fortunately, I wasn't one of them. But so you can't help but think about it. I'm sure you do. Often I awake at night thinking about things that happened way back during the war.
Yeah, I wish that we could stop all wars, all times, and I don't know how to do it. It's just something about human nature that they feel that they cannot work the solution, can't get a solution peaceably. They suddenly feel that they have to go and beat the crap out of somebody else, and I don't understand that. Never did, and I don't think it'll ever stop.
No, I mean, it's
I don't
easy to
think
tell
so.
somebody else to do it. If they themselves had to do it, it would be probably a different outcome, perhaps.
It would help, perhaps.
Perhaps you hope. Let's see. I mean, if I have any questions that I had written in advance, I don't want to take more time than you're willing to spend with me, but.
Yeah, this is pretty intense.
Yes.
Yeah, there's a lot of.
Well, I guess here's something I often ask people, and I'll ask each one of you. I mean, if there was just one thought, one idea you wanted to get across to somebody who are going to see this interview at some point, what would be that one thought or idea you want to pass along to them? It could be on anything we've talked about, or perhaps something we haven't even touched on.
Well, mine is not, my feeling would be that there is, I said earlier, there is no good war. Even though the author Studs Terkel wrote a novel called World War II was the last good war because of what we were fighting for, but there really isn't a good war. You figure all the people who are killed, no matter what, and wounded, and the civilians killed and wounded. It's just not good, and I agree with Gus. There's no way we're going to stop it.
I can't add anything to that. That sums it up. Thank you.
Yeah, I think Circle Pride was thinking just because at that time it was it seemed to be so clearly good and evil, you know, were so clearly defined that there wasn't the ambiguity that you have sometimes in conflicts, perhaps these days. It seems so clear cut, but of course, as you said, the price that we pay for any war is just so incredibly high. You do question, is it worth it?
Yeah, I don't know how Hitler would have been stopped.
No,
No,
it had to be done.
that
And thank God for you guys, really. You know, it'd be a very different world today if you hadn't succeeded. You know, I think about that a lot.
yeah.
Well, we're proud of what we've did, but we don't consider us unusual because so many other people have done it.
Oh yeah, there were in the Battle of the Bulge alone. There were more than 1 million Germans and U.S. I think the statistics are something like 500,000 Germans, 500,000 GIs. It was an American battle.
That's right.
And,
That's
just in that one 25, 30-day engagement, what was it, December 16th
the
to
16th
January
to
25th?
January
The 6 weeks,
25th.
80,000, how many guys were killed in that thing? 17 or 18,000
Oh, yes,
guys were
yes.
killed and so many more wounded, maimed. I think maimed is a better word than wounded.
That's true.